Henry, your clock is finished. I'm going to take you through the mechanism, show you how to work it and how to do adjustments and keep it running in the future. These are the old ribbon spools made out of wood, dried and cracked, split. This one fell apart on me, so I machined 2 new spools out of phenolic. This mechanism works very similar to my machine and my first video, where you have 2 wheels, and the wheel in the front has the time of the day marked on it, and there's movable pegs that can go around the dial. When the peg contacts this protrusion and lifts this and then lets it drop as it passes by, this changes the position on which the card will be punched, from checking into at the morning to checking out at night when you're ready to leave. The wheel in the back and the pegs, when they lift, change between being on time and being tardy. When the black is facing forward, you're on time, and when you switch to red, that's tardy. And that will coincide with either blue ink or red ink getting stamped on your card. If you need to change the day so that what's displayed in the window of what day it is corresponds to the day being punched, you do that with this lever right here. Each time you lift and lower, it changes the day. And that also, changing the day will also reposition this lever, which is the stop for when you put your card in, how far down the card goes. It rests on that stop. So on your time card, your different days line up one after another. These pieces came from a donor machine that I had. This piece and this pin and spacer and a couple other pieces I had to make from scratch in order to get this mechanism back together again. When you lift and lower the lever, it oscillates back and forth between being on this side, being on that side. It just makes it tip back and forth. That does 2 things. It moves this back and forth, which is the flag. So you can see the flag going from tardy to on time. But it also has a pin here that causes this lever to move back and forth. And when it's sitting on this side, it will push on this back end, which makes sure that you punch with blue ink. But when you switch to the other side and punch, it will raise it up and you'll punch with red ink, like this. Go back to blue ink. If I raise and lower, now I'll push it back down to punch with blue. On the back side of the case, towards the bottom, you can see the cutout where there used to be a block. I'm adding this piece of oak in here, and that is where you will mount the clock to the wall. The backboard has a pretty good size hole in it from previous mounting, so we're going to patch this up. We'll start by drilling out a hole to clean it up. Here the hole has been drilled, and I've made this oak plug to fill in the hole. A little bit of glue and tapping with a mallet, we'll be set to go. The cabinet has been taken apart and it's ready to be sanded down. Had several loose pieces up at the head that have been re-glued and clamped, so it's a good solid surface now. We'll sand all this down in the morning. This particular clock was shipped to the U.S. Housing Corporation, Department of Labor, October 10th, 1918. And this label's on the inside door that swings down in front of the card punch mechanism. So we'll keep that label intact when we sand this down. On the clock you can see that the gear teeth of the main gear are really badly worn. Every one of these. What it should look like is that. So this is a good main gear, and this one's severely worn and damaged. And that was caused by the fact that this probably never got oil for the 100 years it's been in existence, and you can see how it is worn, that bushing way out to the side, which caused this gear to push away from these pins in the next gear that it's driving. So these are separating and causing it to ride way up on the top of the tooth and wear it out. So in addition to replacing this gear, going to have to rebush that, and there's also several others that have got wear here and here. All of these need to be rebushed as I rebuild this. New bushing is made and pressed in place, and the old one, goodbye. Rest of the pieces ready to be cleaned and put back together. Both springs get cleaned and relubricated with a special barrel lubricant that stays sticky and remains on the spring for a long time, so it'll keep lubricating it properly. This gear had a broken pin that I'm holding here in the needle nose pliers, and that pin was right there. So I've drilled out the little bent over tab that holds these pins in place, and this is a piece of 46 thousandths diameter high-speed steel drill blank, and that will go in. I'll cut it to length and then peen this over again to captivate it and hold it in. To mount the clock on the wall, you need to find a stud in your wall and put a pretty heavy lag screw, like at least 1/4 inch lag bolt, into the wood, and then hang it from here first, and do not secure the bottom yet. The bottom is a bolt right here that I've added. Alright, so that should also be in line with the stud in your wall. But before you attach this one, you want to start the clock ticking and take the clock and rotate it. Take the clock and move it a little left or a little right so that you have an equal number for the pendulum to swing to. Right now it's swinging at about 2 to 3 on each side, and it should be going the same distance each way. Then also you want to take a listen up here, and you hear the tick-tock, tick-tock is equal between tick and tock. The amount of time that it takes to hear one click and then the other click should be equal both ways. If this whole case is tilted one way or the other, you won't have an equal time between what you hear, tick and tock. So get that all set, and then you can mount the bottom screw. It's a good idea to oil the clock about once a year, and you'll remove the outer wood trim and then the dial face, which is mounted on these 4 screws, and the hands, of course. And then you want to look for every little pivot or little hole where you see a pivot coming through, and every one of these needs a drop of clock or watchmaker's oil on it. You pretty much want to oil everything that's moving, so these rotate around this screw, so a little drop of oil in there, but just a tiny bit. Don't have a lot that's running down because it'll drip down on the rest of your card punch mechanism. And for every pivot you see coming out here, you have another one on the back side, on that back plate. So you need to properly and thoroughly oil it, you really need to remove this whole clockwork mechanism. You do that by taking out 3 screws, 1, 2, 3, and remove this, turn it around, and then oil all the pivots on the back side also. To mount the pendulum into the clock, you've got a hook, and it hooks backwards, and you're going to hang this hook on a pin that's behind the clock mechanism. That pin is behind the mechanism. Here I'm hitting it with my little red tool, and if I come out and look, it's way in the back. So you need to take the pendulum and get it up under and then hook it onto that pin. Once the pendulum is hooked onto the pin, you can see it there in the very back, then you want to come down here and find this rod, and that rod goes into this slot. So we're getting this over and then drop it into the slot, and you should have this rod coming down and have just a little bit of play where the pendulum is not fully hitting this bar. You should have just a little bit of space in here. That'll help things work a little better. And then it's actually this little rod which is pushing on the pendulum back and forth to give it the force it needs to keep ticking. To unlock the front door, you have the key in, and you need to turn it in this direction, and then the door will come open. Remember that when you remove the dial, you're going to have to take this nut off and remove the hands, and then your wind indicators, you'll have to get in here and grab onto them and pull straight out. They're just a friction fit to go back onto the Geneva stop that's inside that causes it to go up and down. And when you put them back on, try to get the wind indicator close to the surface of the clock without touching it, or the dial face. You don't want it rubbing on the dial face, but you don't want it too far out so that the hand will interfere in contact when the hands go by. This knob adjusts when you're going to punch in and out for morning, afternoon, and overtime. So it gives the employee the ability to change that on their own. If you want to remove that capability or lock this, you would turn this key and then it's locked and can't be adjusted by the employee. Once the front door is open, you pivot this outwards and lift it up, and trying to clear the card chute. Then there's a lever here that has to be lifted up to open this hole, so that when you pivot forward, the knob can go through the hole. And it hits right at the very top, so if you push down just a little bit, you can help it through and keep it from scraping the top of the chrome finish. And then gently lower it down, and it'll hang on its own down here. There's a rod that comes from the clock above, and this rod drives the card punch mechanism. If the time on the clock doesn't match the time being punched on the time card, you can loosen this screw and adjust this rod below, which goes and drives the time being punched. So there's like a U-joint, universal joint that's right here, and the same setup is up above on the other end of the rod. And between the two, one or the other, whichever is more convenient, you can adjust this position, and this is how you synchronize the time from the clock with the time on the card punch mechanism. To set the time on the clock, you can grab the minute hand up close to the base here and rotate it clockwise. You can always go forward in time, but never ever backwards. Get it to the time you need. To fully synchronize the time you see on the clock face to the card punch mechanism below, start by taking the clock and bringing it up to exactly 12 o'clock. And you want to make sure that you are 12 or maybe even a half a minute after. You need to hear all the clunks that you just heard right at 12 o'clock so that the card punching mechanism below is ready to do the adjustment sequence we're about to do next. If you haven't heard all that clunking, you may be just a half a minute before, so get right on 12 or even a minute after. Then the next thing you want to do is make sure that these wheels in the back, this peg coming down, is pointing at 12 o'clock noon. If it's not, if you're pointing at some other time, then continue to rotate the clock hands until you get right here to 12 o'clock noon. And then go back here and move your hour hand, because this is just a friction fit, so you could be on some other time. You want this to be 12 o'clock noon when that says 12 o'clock noon. Then the next thing you're going to do is raise and lower this rear rod until you have black facing forward. Then raise and lower the front rod and watch this arrow move across. Keep doing it, raise and drop until the arrow goes all the way back to the left. After it's back to the left, raise and drop one more time so it's one indent, one position in. That's the proper place to be for 12 o'clock noon. Then you'll take a blank card and give it a punch to see what time it is. Now it says that it's 7:02. Don't worry that you're set right on 12 o'clock and you have 2 minutes after. There's some backlash in all these gears. When the clock is not actually running and being driven by the clock, then the time can move forward a minute or two. But once the clock starts ticking, it'll take out that backlash and you'll be back to a lot closer in time. So 7:02, we need to get to 12 p.m. and right now it's p.m. on Tuesday, but it's 7. So if I raise and lower this piece of metal right here, raise and dropping at one time will advance the hour. So it should be 8 right now. I'll go make another punch. And you see now it's 8. So every time I raise and lower, I advance the hour. This will be 9, 10, 11. But notice it's 11 p.m. When I hit 12 o'clock, it goes to 12 a.m. So I don't want to leave it right there because that's 12 a.m. I need to get all the way back around to 12 p.m. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 p.m. And I'll double check that with a punch. And there is 12 p.m. The next thing you're going to set is the day of the week. You'll do that in 2 places. The first thing you want to do is raise and lower this bar. You just grab it, go up and drop it. And you're going to do this many times in a row, and as you're doing it, raise and drop, you're going to watch for this plate here to start raising. There it goes. You want to just keep going till it raises all the way up, and then finally it'll drop. So keep watching it. Maybe one more, one more, one more. Boom. Once it drops, then stop and give yourself a punch and see what the day is. Okay, so I punched right there and it's Saturday. So if I want to change it, let's say to Wednesday, then right behind this dial there's a lever. Can't see it from here, but it'll raise and lower this. Every time I raise and lower it, raise, lower, just let it drop back down. That advances it one day. So I was on Saturday. Let's see what we have now. See, it went from Saturday to Sunday. So I'll do it a couple more times. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So now it should say Wednesday on the card. Alright, that's not the right one. That was from a previous. There it is, Wednesday at 12:02. So I now have the wheels of the punching mechanism set for Wednesday, but I need to synchronize what's seen through the front window. It says Tuesday, and what you need to do is lift and lower this, and that moves it to the next day. And if it's already past Wednesday, like let's say it's Thursday, just keep going. Saturday, Sunday, it resets, and then get yourself back to Wednesday. So now it's Wednesday at AM, 12 o'clock, but the only thing left is that we're 12 o'clock Wednesday AM, and this was 12 o'clock noon, which is PM. So I need to take this first lever that I moved and walk it through the hours. Here, let me show you. We'll find a new spot to punch on. And notice how it is 12:02 on Wednesday. I'm going to raise and lower this. Every time I do, I advance an hour. So that should be 1 o'clock. Let me show you that. All right, see how it's changed from 12 to 1? So this is going to be 2 o'clock, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock a.m. And then one more raise and drop will go to 12 p.m. So now this is what's seen through the window, p.m. Wednesday. And if I do another punch, that's the right one right there that I'm currently set to. Now your clock is completely synchronized and everything should match. So we're back to the 12 noon, which is 12 p.m. and all I have to do to get the right time is, let's say it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and just advance yourself to 3 p.m. So hopefully you're on the right day. If you're not at 12 o'clock noon, if you're at some other times, depending on what time it is, this mechanism is in the middle of moving, and these levers that I've been lifting and lowering and dropping, they don't always have the free movement that I just showed you. They may be in the middle of raising because they've been driven by the mechanism and they're locked in that position, and you cannot raise and lower them by hand like I did. So it's real important that you do all of this at the top of the hour so that you have the ability to make all these adjustments by hand. To start the pendulum, you don't have to push to an extreme position, just up to about number 3 or 4 at the most, and then let go. When you're closing the lower door, you want to bring it up and then put a little bit of downward force on the knob so that it comes through the front without scratching the top of the knob. And then also there's a slide plate here that you want to have this and the card punch mechanism line up so that this slide plate goes on both sides and then fully seat. You have 2 spring-loaded levers here and here. When you put this plate back in place, you kind of roll it in behind the card punch or the card chute, and the bottom presses down on those levers, and it's the pressing of those levers that locks this in place so it can't open back up on you. Here's a close-up view of the work that's been done so you can see how things turned out. I touched up the ITR logo and had a reproduction dial made, and then hand made the small wind indicators. Well, I think I'll punch the clock and see what time it is. Looks like it's time to move on to my next restoration. For more information, visit GameRoomRepair.com.